Today, I'm interviewing Bruce Bridges, who is not only the owner of Bridges Tsavorite, but is the son of Campbell Bridges, who actually discovered Tsavorite in the early 1960s. Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time. How are you? Where are you recording from?
I'm very well, thank you, and thank you very much for having me. I am actually in Arizona right now, so in the US, not too far away.
I'm so jealous. I wish I was in Arizona. It's one of my favorite states. You guys have really crisp air there, and I swear when I go, I have no allergies and no inflammation. It's like magic.
It is quite pleasant out here usually, but I have to say it's a wee bit cold and rainy for my liking right now. But
Oh.
I guess that's all relative at the end of the day.
Sure, sure. Well, it sounds ideal to me. Well, I'm glad that you're here on the podcast with us. Today we're talking about Tsavorite, which is such an entrancing gem, and it has enthralled so many people in this industry. So I'm very excited to be talking about its history and allure with you today. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about you and how you got into the business and what Tsavorite is?
Surely so. Um, I was pretty much born in the industry. I'm third generation. My family's been in gems and minerals in Africa for over three generations, and my father is indeed the man that discovered Tsavorite and also the first person to bring tanzanite for identification to the United States, and was Tiffany and Company's consultant on tanzanite during its discovery years. So, or that is my legacy, and with all of that being said, I certainly wouldn't say, even as I mentioned, I'm third generation. It wasn't something that my father said you must do, that I had to take over the mines and I had to take over the gem industry when I came of age. But he really never pressured my sister and I. I have one older sister, and he never pressured us to really come in the industry. I would say he involved us from a very, very early age. I mean, my earliest memories are at the mine, and if you look at old family photos, I'm a babe in arms at the mine, and I mean, I pretty much learned to ride a bike and do everything that a kid would during their evolution and development at the mine. But that was just a way of
Wow.
for us, really. It wasn't something that my father said, well, this is what you're going to have to do when you get older. So he certainly involved us with every aspect of the industry. And I mean, I started cutting at 4 years old. And he just involved us in everything from grading to sorting to cutting to mining and prospecting, which of course was probably, thinking back, the prospecting part was definitely the most fun as a little kid, because basically you get to wander around in the middle of the bush, and it's just a big adventure for you at that age, and you're sort of going after pirates' treasure, right? So that was certainly the most entertaining aspect when I think back. And then as you get older and your interests develop, the rest of the industry became of interest as well. So definitely wasn't something that he forced on us. And my sister ended up going a completely different route, and she's not in the industry. But I ended up being in the gem and mineral industry and mining industry, and it's certainly
It
been a,
sounds like you chose it, it wasn't chosen for you.
yeah, very very much so. And I mean, even in university, when my when I went to, actually got recruited to the U of A. I was the 100 meter sprinter at the U of A for 5 years. And when I went to the University of Arizona, um, of course, I discussed with my parents what my major would be. My father actually encouraged me to do something other than geology, because I grew up with it my whole life. And I was a finance and marketing major, so a business major at the U of A. And I've actually found those tools extremely useful in my life as a businessman in the industry. And I think it was a very wise choice. And then I remember when I graduated university, my father said, well, why don't you do something outside of the gem industry to see what you think and see how you like it? And then if you like it, stick with it. If you don't, you can always come back whenever you want. So for 2 years after I graduated university, I actually worked in the financial services industry, and decided after about 2 years of staring at a computer screen that that wasn't really what I wanted to do with my life. So then, thankfully, Dad took me back, and really the rest is history.
You'd rather be digging in the dirt, huh?
Yeah, very much so. Rather be outside digging in the dirt any day than staring at a screen.
It must be your passion. I mean, for you to have kind of explored other things and still come back to it, it sounds like your heart was really with the industry the whole time.
Certainly so. And then as I got older, I understood how important legacy was. I mean, I always had an idea of it, and I was very proud of what my father did. But as I got older and I really understood more and more about that legacy and what it takes to keep a legacy alive and going, I wouldn't say maybe a sense of duty, but I certainly feel a sense of pride with being in the industry and doing my best, at least, to carry on my father's dream.
I think you should have pride. I think your name carries a lot of weight. You're very well known. Your father is very well known. And I come to understand it's a very interesting story how Tsavorite was discovered. It wasn't discovered originally in Kenya, is that right?
Yes, that's right. I mean, a lot of people do think that Tsavorite was discovered in Kenya because it is named after the Tsavo National Park in Kenya, which is very close to where we mine. However, Tsavorite, my father's first discovery of Tsavorite is actually in Zimbabwe, and the first accredited discovery of Tsavorite that my father is accredited for is in 1967 in Tanzania. So both locales, obviously, outside of Kenya.
Funny that it was sort of discovered in Tanzania. I guess you couldn't call it tanzanite because tanzanite had already been found at that time, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting actually, the link between Tsavorite and Tanzanite, as they're very closely linked, and they're very closely linked in our family history. So to give you a quick summary, Tanzanite was discovered in mid 1967 in the Merelani Hills of Tanzania, and that's still where Tanzanite is mined to this day, and that would have been mid 67. And then my father actually discovered Tsavorite just a few months later, uh, about 13 kilometers outside of the village of Komolo, Tanzania, which is northern Tanzania as well. And you have to remember, when we're talking about Tanzania and Kenya here, these locations where these gems are found, they're all basically within 100-mile radius of Mount Kilimanjaro. So it's something that,
Wow.
yes, you have Kenya and you have Tanzania, but obviously the geology is very similar within certain regions of the world. So geology doesn't necessarily follow strict governmental borders. So with that being the case, my father's discovery of Tsavorite in Tanzania came just a few short months. It was in late 1967. So they both were discovered in the first year. I mean, in the same year. And then going back to naming, uh, Tanzanite had indeed been named before Tsavorite had been named. So Tanzanite was already taken.
What was Tsavorite called at first?
So Tsavorite at first was just green grossular garnet, and nobody,
Oh,
yeah, nobody had seen a green grossular garnet um, in those colors before, and or from that region in the world before. So it was a discovery of a brand new variety of garnet, but the name hadn't been developed, and actually some years later, it took quite a few years later until 1973. So you had basically a 6-year span where Tsavorite wasn't called Tsavorite; it was called green grossular garnet, which probably wasn't the most
that's
romantic.
so funny.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, for commercial reasons, they had to come up with a name. So if we go back
Sure.
to sort of the origin and genesis, and why I say they're um, so interlinked, aside from being discovered in the same year. So if we go back to the history of Tsavorite, my father actually first came across his first samples of Tsavorite in 1961 when he was working for the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority on beryllium deposits in what was then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. And he decided to take a weekend out and take a break and go and prospect in a range of hills that had a very unique geology that he found interesting. And when he drove to the base of this range of hills, he got out to go on his prospecting venture. And as he was making his way up the hill, a large rogue Cape buffalo charged him out of the bush. And my father jumped into a nearby ravine. And thankfully, that ravine was there, number one, and number two, that it was too steep for the buffalo to get in after him. So my father then,
Wow.
seeing that the buffalo couldn't come in and get him, he, I guess, had a little less trepidation about going on his trek. So my father made his way up the ravine prospecting, and the buffalo, being an ornery fellow, followed along the edge of the ravine for a wee bit. And then I guess he got bored and he went on his merry way. And my father kept prospecting at along the ravine and made his way up towards the crest of the hills. And right before he came to the very top of the hill, he noticed the green glint in the sunlight. And when he went down to investigate, he saw these glinting green crystals that were quite unlike anything he had ever seen before. And he took those samples, and looking at it, he could tell that. And keep in mind, my father's father was had a doctorate in geology and was head of Rant Mines in South Africa, chief geologist for Rant Mines, etc. So my father actually had his first mine at 6 years old. He discovered an amethyst mine on the family plot. So here he was a very accomplished geologist. He got his geological degree from Wits University in South Africa. So looking at this sample, he realized that this was a green garnet, and it was a green unlike anything he had ever seen before. It certainly wasn't demantoid, and he was enthralled by it, but unfortunately he was moved off that location and never had a chance to further investigate. And if we keep in mind that's 1961 in Zimbabwe, and it wasn't until 1967 that he was back in Tanzania. I say back in because my family originally started in what was Tanganyika. Tanganyika was the area of Tanzania prior to it being called Tanzania. Basically, what you had happen is you had the mainland Tanganyika. When it joined with Zanzibar, it became Tanzania. So that's how Tanzania came about. So if you look at the history of my family in Africa, we started in Tanganyika, then went down to Southern Africa, and then made our way back to East Africa, which my father did in the mid 1960s. And it isn't until 1967 that he actually is accredited with discovering Tsavorite, because that was the mine in Tanzania that he was able to, that was the locale in Tanzania he was able to develop into a mine, and really where Tsavorite mining occurred. And that's an interesting story in and of itself, and it lends itself to the previous discovery in 61 in Zimbabwe, because my father was in Tanzania on tanzanite actually at the time. And again, as I go back, tanzanite and Tsavorite extremely closely interlinked. And again, if we look at history, mid 1967, tanzanite came out. My father was sold his first samples of tanzanite actually as sapphire. The vendor selling it to him claimed they were sapphire. My father obviously knew it wasn't sapphire. He suspected it was a blue zoisite. And of course, there was no blue zoisite in the world at the time. So my father took these samples over to the US. And when he took them over to the US, he took them to the Gemological Institute of America, so the GIA. And the chief scientist at the GIA said, well, we've never seen anything like this before. Let's run some tests. And you suspect that it's blue zoisite, and let's see if it is. So they came back and they said, wow, these are the first samples we've ever seen, but this is indeed a blue zoisite. And we suggest you take these over to Harry Platt at Tiffany and Company. And that was really the introduction to Tiffany and Company with my family and my father's relationship. And they said that Harry was a man that had great foresight and was always interested in new things. So based on that, my father got an appointment with Mr. Platt, and he met Harry and showed him these new finds from Africa. And keep in mind, Harry Platt was to become president of Tiffany and Company. So he wasn't president at that time, but he was to soon become president of Tiffany and Company. And Mr. Platt felt that it was fantastic material, and he said, well, Campbell, let me know when you get back to Tanzania if there's more material coming out, and I would be extremely interested in it. And he said, I'm not there's not enough material here for Tiffany and Company to purchase, but why don't you take this to the American Museum of Natural History and show them, and also the Smithsonian, and show them. So my father showed the samples to the American Museum of Natural History, and they acquired some samples, and he also showed samples to the Smithsonian, who also said they'd never seen anything like that before. And interestingly enough, with the Smithsonian, my father was never that big into selling gems, but he loved to trade gems. So he actually traded the Smithsonian their first samples of tanzanite ever for the Smithsonian's at the time a sample of their tourmaline collection. So to this day, I have in the original box the Smithsonian's tourmaline, well, samples from their tourmaline collection, and that's what was traded for the first samples of tanzanite that they ever received. And to take you on this tangent, the reason why is because if you look at all these relationships that my father made on tanzanite, it was just a couple months later that my father in Tanzania saw a range of hills that had very similar geology to what he had seen in Zimbabwe those 6 years prior. And he said to himself, well, I never had a chance to further explore that range of hills in Zimbabwe, or develop a mine or even prospect much more than the samples that he had discovered there. But he felt, let me go and prospect this range of hills that again is about 13 kilometers outside of the village of Komolo, and see if I can re-find what I found in Zimbabwe those years prior. And then my father went and prospected in just outside of the village of Komolo, and lo and behold, he rediscovered what he had found in Zimbabwe. And that is where his first Tsavorite mine developed, and where all of the original Tsavorite that hit the world market came from. And it was a relationship that he made with Tanzanite, where as soon as he discovered Tsavorite in Tanzania, that he then took those samples immediately to Harry Platt at Tiffany and Company. And Harry Platt was enthralled with this new discovery. And he said, well, Campbell, this gem is everything a fine gemstone should be, and then some, as it is considerably brighter than emerald, not treated in any way, and far, far rarer with a purer grain. And really, the rest is history, except for the fact that it didn't have a name. And so if you look at the timeline, here we are in late 67 that my father showed Tiffany and Company the first samples of Tsavorite, and they acquired their first samples of Tsavorite. And then Harry Platt was selling this material for several years. And finally, he came to my father and he said, well, Campbell, you know that I love this green gemstone of yours, your discovery here of green grossular garnet, but I'm having some trouble with some of my clients romanticizing the gem and selling this gem called green grossular garnet. We really need to do something with it, just like we did with tanzanite, right? Because Harry Platt is the man credited for naming tanzanite. And obviously tanzanite did extraordinarily well. And then if you look back to any of the old history of Tiffany and Company in tanzanite. They even utilized Elizabeth Taylor in a lot of their marketing, because if you remember, she had those uh, gorgeous, just sort of violet bluish, violety blue eyes as well. That's very similar to tanzanite too, right? I mean, who would be a more
Yeah.
perfect spokesperson than somebody like Elizabeth Taylor at the time? So all of that tanzanite
True.
would have been acquired through my father, as um, he was their official consultant on tanzanite in those days. So then Harry Platt told my father, "Well, you really need to think of something where we really need to think of a name for this gem so that we can better market it." And so Mr. Platt said to my father, "Well, Campbell, you discovered the stone. What would you like to name it?" And interestingly enough, my mother actually had a name that she came up with, and she had a slogan as well that she had already developed. And she said, "Well, I'd like to call this. I think the gem should be named Campbellite." And because it was discovered by my father, and his first name is Campbell, and her slogan was "Have a Campbellite by candlelight." And I remember,
Oh, I like that.
yeah. So then I remember when it was recounted to me, my father said, "Well, Harry and I weren't overly enthused with that name or that slogan, perhaps. If you knew, my father was an extremely modest man, and he would never name anything after himself." So
Aw.
my father thought for a while, and Harry Platt said, "Well, Campbell, since you discovered the stone, is there anything you would like to name it after?" And my father said, "Well, you know, whilst I discovered this gemstone in Tanzania, I had to leave Tanzania in 1970 when Julius Nyerere came to power and he nationalized the mines, and he literally kicked us out of the country. So then my father had traced the strike of green grossular garnet from Tanzania into Kenya. So we moved to Kenya in 1970 when we had to leave Tanzania. And that's why I grew up in Kenya, number one. And number two, that is my father in late 1970 rediscovered, or in this case, discovered Tsavorite in Kenya for the first time as well. So he first discovered Tsavorite unofficially 1961 in Zimbabwe. He discovered Tsavorite officially in 1967 in Tanzania. We had to leave Tanzania in 1970, and he traced the strike of Tsavorite from Tanzania into Kenya and discovered Tsavorite in Kenya in 1970. So with that timeline in your mind, this is 1973 that Harry Platt said that he really needed to come up with a name for it. So quite a few years have gone by. And my father said, since I had to leave Tanzania, Kenya is going to be my new home. And I've discovered Tsavorite in Kenya at this point, and that's where my mines are, and that's where I'm going to raise my family and spend the rest of my life. So I would like to name this gemstone in honor of Kenya as opposed to Tanzania. So my
Wow.
father said we mine very close to the famed Tsavo National Park in Kenya, very famous for its uh, glorious wildlife and beautiful landscapes. And it's one of the best national parks for African wildlife in the world. And he said, therefore, I'd like to, since we're mining so close to this wonderful location, I'd like to name Tsavorite, I would like to name green grossular garnet in honor of Tsavo. And all and mineralogical nomenclature at the time dictated that all, and still does, that all new discoveries have to end in ITE. So my father took
Mhm.
Tsavo and simply added ITE on the end, and you ended up with Tsavorite. The Germans at the time had a different idea, and I'll see on a few stubborn gem reports every now from Idar Oberstein, it still says Tsavorite, because the Germans like the idea.
Wow.
Yeah, they accepted the fact that my father chose Tsavo, but the Germans liked light because And it's not a bad thinking either. I understand why, because Tsavorite is a very bright green gemstone. Uh,
Sure.
the Germans liked light because it was such a light gem and such a bright gemstone. But my father liked Tsavorite, and then that name was ratified by Sibjo, and Tsavorite was born in 1973. And then Tiffany and Company came out with the first ad debuting Tsavorite to the world in 1974, which I actually have hanging in my office here. But it's really quite a fascinating history to see how intertwined Tsavorite and tanzanite were. All the relationships my father built on tanzanite really led to um, the birth of the market for Tsavorite as well. And then, of course, the naming behind Tsavorite and the reasons behind that. And really, as Tsavorite, the name was born in 1973 and then publicized in 74. The rest is history.
That is incredible. Oh my goodness. I knew there were connections between tanzanite and Tsavorite, but I didn't know all of that, and I still have so many questions. I know we
Sure.
don't have time, but like I am curious. When he first found tanzanite, how did he know it was zoisite?
When my father first saw zoisite, the blue zoisite that was sold to him as sapphire, it's quite apparent if you see rough uh, tanzanite or you see rough sapphire. I mean, obviously the crystal structure is completely different, but let's say you brought
Sure.
shards of rough as opposed to actual euhedral crystals. It's still very apparent. I mean, you have rough zoisites going to be trichroic as opposed to this blue sapphire, which will be dichroic, and they'll look completely different. An interesting aspect of tanzanite in the field, rough tanzanite, they often in the field refer to it as diesel because it has a sort of a brownish gray look to it oftentimes before it's heated. I mean, some is extraordinarily blue coming out of the ground, but uh,
Has it just been heated underground? Is that why?
yes, I mean that would be exactly why.
But that's
Obviously,
uncommon? Like, in the grand scheme of tanzanite, that's pretty uncommon?
in the greater scheme of tanzanite, yes, you generally have more that diesel, grayish, brown color or a light lavender color than you do the rich blue. Now, you definitely do get rich blue, but the vast majority, well over 90% of tanzanite is heated in order to give it that lovely blue
Sure.
color that you're familiar with. So one of the easiest ways to determine, though, let's say you were brought, let's say there was no history between sapphire, blue sapphire, and nobody had ever seen tanzanite before. If best case scenario, you got an extremely blue sample of rough tanzanite by a stroke of luck, and let's say it didn't have the characteristic secondary purpley lavender violet hue to it and was just pure blue, which rarely occurs, but it can occur, of course. Hardness is the easiest way, right? I mean,
Mhm.
tanzanite's extraordinarily soft compared to sapphire. So sapphire, you have a hardness of 9 on Mohs scale. Sapphire is about a 6.5. So that is just an extremely easy way to tell that it's not sapphire. So any gemologist, geologist that's worth their salt in any way can readily tell when they're brought, if they were to be brought a blue sapphire, or if they were to be brought a tanzanite.
I think it's very telling of your dad's expertise for him to have not even seen blue zoisite or even know that zoisite had come in blue, to be able to see this, imitation of sapphire and know not just that it's not sapphire, but that it's zoisite, I think is very impressive.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my father's gift with gems and minerals is really unparalleled. I've never seen, I mean, I've spent my whole life in this industry and I've met the best of the best, and I've never met anybody that had the talent for gems that he had.
That's incredible. Well, I absolutely love hearing about the history, and I know that we could just totally go on and discuss it more and more at length. But I think we need to get into some of the nitty gritty details of Tsavorite. I love Tsavorite. I prefer it to emerald. Garnets, all the garnets are probably my favorites, but I really think highly of Tsavorite. And it's I feel like it's not super well known. I mean, it is in the industry and with collectors. I know that it is, but would you say that it's a little less heard of than maybe emerald or some of the other garnets because of its rarity?
Certainly so. I mean, rarity is a double-edged sword somewhat, right? Because on one hand, for any gemstone, you want it to be rare enough for it to be exotic and something that is sought after, but you don't want it to be so rare that it's unobtainium, right? That you simply can't get a hold of it. Because if you think about a jeweler is all for selling something that's beautiful and rare that his clientele would want. However, if a jeweler sells one stone and another client walks in and says they want another one of those stones, or that same client says, okay, well, now I want a matched pair of earrings, or we want a set um, of stones in order to put a suite together, you want that jeweler to be able to accommodate those clients and his clientele should they wish to purchase more of this material. So with that being the case, if your gemstone is too rare, then number one, jewelers aren't really going to want to get behind it because they simply can't replace what they might have. And I mean, you could disappoint your clientele. And if there isn't enough material on the market, you can't market it. you know,
Sure.
so it is an interesting aspect where you want a gem to be rare, but you don't want it to be so rare that you can't get a hold of it.
And
Uh,
correct me if I'm wrong, it's not that Tsavorite is unobtainably rare. I'm under the impression that it's not commonly found in larger sizes. Is that correct?
yes, it's certainly not commonly found in larger sizes, but it certainly is rare. So to give you an idea, Savrite is 1,000 to 5,000 times rarer than emerald. So
Wow!
it's 1,000 times rarer than emerald below 3 carats, 5,000 times rarer than emerald above 3 carats.
That's
So
mind-boggling. And then is it really only found in Kenya?
in commercial quantities, it's only found in Kenya and Tanzania. There is some Savrite in Madagascar. The color's a little different. It tends to be a little darker. Keep in mind, these are generalizations.
Sure.
But generally, the Savrite material from Madagascar is extremely high in vanadium. So Savrite is colored by it. To give you just a quick, I guess, mineralogic mineralogical score here on exactly what Tsavorite is. Tsavorite is a calcium aluminium silicate, and it's colored by chromium and vanadium. So chromium and vanadium, which are also the coloring agents in emerald, uh, are what color Tsavorite. So the material from Madagascar tends to be very, very high in vanadium content and therefore very dark.
Interesting.
So the Madagascan material does exist, but not much material comes out of Madagascar, less than 80 kilograms a year. And it really of commercial importance is only found in Kenya and Tanzania.
And all of your mines currently are in Kenya, is that correct?
Yes, all of my mines currently are in Kenya.
How many mines do you have?
Let me see. We have 5.
5? And how many are there total, do you think?
Total, there's a lot of mines because you have to remember when I say 5, even when I say 5, it's not like I have 5 spread all over the country. I have 5 locations within a 9 square kilometer area.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
So it's all a contiguous area. So there's 5 locations in one area, basically. But if you look at where Tsavorite is mined, if you look at my father's original mine in Kamalo, Tanzania, which nowadays they call Lemshuko, Tanzania, you have mines there, and you have many, many mines there. Now, when you ask how many, it's hard to tell, because there's how much organized mining is there, not so much, but there's a great deal of artisanal mining there. So you have people coming and going all the time. So when there's a big strike, you could have, well, I remember at one location close to us in Kenya, you had 2,000 locations in one area. So how many mines are there? Well, it's one location, but there's 2,000 different miners in there. So
Sure.
it would be very hard to give you an accurate figure there. But basically, a quick summary would be, if you take my father's original mine in Kamalo, now Lemshuko, Tanzania, you'll have quite a few miners in that original location and dotting that border. And then you'll have our mines in southern Kenya, in the Taita area of southern Kenya. And then you'll have numerous mines basically all around our border. So, and those numbers change all the time. Official mines, not so many. Official mines would be probably, well, then also you're getting into small scale, large scale. And that's a big question mark in mining as well, because I don't consider our mine large scale, even though the Kenyan government now considers our mine large scale. Large scale mining, to me, is really what you see in diamond mining and that sort of thing. Even a mine such as what Tanzanite 1 did in Merelani, Tanzania, which at its zenith was very large for a colored gemstone mine, I wouldn't consider that large scale either. I would say that K-Gem's mines in Zambia are probably the closest. The K-Gem mine. So K-Gem would be our friends at sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. I know them as well as I know my own. So the I'm sorry, Gemfields. So my apologies, Gemfields. I certainly have not forgotten you. But the Gemfields mines at their K-Gem location in Zambia, I would say that's a large scale mine. As far as colored gemstone mining, that is certainly large scale. But if someone were to ask, as far as Tsavorite mining is concerned, I don't consider any Tsavorite mine in the world large scale. I know ours is considered large scale, but if you've been to a lot of mines in your life, you wouldn't think so.
Wow, very interesting. Have always been very fascinated with mining, and so it's so interesting to hear just about the diversity in mining all over the world. And it sounds like Tsavorite, it's kind of its own niche, and the mines are just very diverse and different from, diamond mines and everything else. So that's really incredible. I do also want to discuss, just from the shopper's point of view, Tsavorite quality and quality factors. I've come to understand that kind of the saturation of color and the brightness of the stone are, of course, factors, and the tone of green, I'm pretty sure, can sort of vary from stone to stone. Is Tsavorite valued more highly when it's more of a bluish green like emerald, or when it's more of a yellowish green?
So that's a very good question. And and this goes for any colored gemstone, there is no official grading scale for any colored gemstone. And I know when people bring up pigeon blood ruby or cornflower blue sapphire, royal blue sapphire, etc., and they say, well, that is a certified grading scale. And while some labs nowadays are indeed putting on their certificates that a ruby might be pigeon blood, or a sapphire might be royal blue or cornflower blue, you'll see quite a bit of differentiation if you were to look at different lab reports than you were to look at different rubies and sapphires as to exactly what is considered pigeon blood or royal, et cetera, et cetera. And the same is true for any other colored gemstone that I can think of. And in hand goes Tsavorite as well, right? So, for instance, our grading scale, the one my father developed, is the most widely used and utilized in the industry. And basically, your premium colors will be a medium to medium dark. So, a medium I would correlate to being a vibrant gross green color. Then one color tone difference up in the scale of saturation would be a medium plus in our grading scale, and we would suggest that that is akin to a rich, vibrant gross green. And then your most saturated color within your premium color range would be a medium dark, and a medium dark we would correlate to a vibrant forest green color. So again, it's not an official scale, but that's the most widely utilized in the industry. And basically anything darker than a medium dark, we consider over dark, and therefore you'll have extinction and it won't have it won't have full life throughout the stone. Anything lighter than a medium, we would consider less saturated than optimal, and therefore not be as richly saturated and as luxurious green as a premium gem should have. Now, that being said, you'll find that different locations, different areas in the world prefer different colors. And especially nowadays, the lighter colors are quite sought after. They don't command the same prices as those medium, medium plus, and medium darks. But there tends to be more of a shift nowadays to lighter colors as far as desirability is concerned, because people like light and bright, and they also like the price point. And material that I find quite amusing when they say that Merlani mint garnet was something that was discovered in like the early 2000s, I've heard, which is one of the most ridiculous statements that I've ever heard of, as far as any who has followed the history of green grossular garnet. And basically, Merlani mint garnet is just the name that's been coined in order for marketing purposes, but it's simply light green grossular garnet, right? So it doesn't have as high a
Would you call it Tsavorite?
that's another big question in the industry, right? Because Tsavorite, in theory, has a higher level of chromium vanadium, and Tsavorite in the beginning, the reason nobody saw the lighter material was because we couldn't sell the lighter material. So we just it's sort of like the fancy zoisite that now people are calling fancy tanzanite. There are other colors of tanzanite aside from blue, right, that now have quite a big market. And if we go even further back in history and you look at fancy colored diamonds, 50, 60 years ago, you can sell fancy colored diamonds, right? It was, if it's not a white diamond,
Right.
it's worthless. And very
It's a
similar,
drill bit.
yeah, very, very much so. And I mean, obviously, you've always had collectors, but not as far as commercially viable on a large scale. And
Sure.
the same is true with Tsavorite. In the early days, we couldn't sell the lighter material, so we just used to just bag it, which means we just basically throw it in a bag and put it in the back of the vault or the room, and it just stays there until we figure out some commercially viable option to do with it.
I
And
imagine that was the motivation behind marketing it as mint garnet, though I would say is probably somebody just had a whole bunch of it and said, "We gotta get rid of this. Let's call it mint garnet and
yeah,
sell it as a new thing."
that's definitely true. On top of that, you have the fact that there is a great deal more mining in Merlani, Tanzania, in the 90s, after you had Afgem, which then became Tanzanite One, really revolutionized the Tanzanite industry. And they brought, again, I'm cagey about the use of the term large scale mining, but they certainly brought professional high level mining operation uh, to Tanzanite, in their development of the tanzanite market in the 90s. And just interestingly, as an aside, many of the Tanzanite One guys, when they left Tanzanite One, they're gem fields now, right? So many of those same people that were in AFGEM then became Tanzanite One. When they left Tanzanite One, many of those guys are in gem fields. So all of this is interlinked. People that don't know the history might not realize it, but it's fascinating. One could write a book just on the accomplishments of what AFGEM did all those years ago and what it branched into over the years. But to take you back on that, and sorry to take you on that tangent, but when a great deal more mining happened and the tanzanite market really exploded in the 90s, there was a lot more mining in Merilani, Tanzania. And you have to remember that, again, Tanzanite and Tsavorite are very closely related, uh, not only in chemical composition, but also in geology and locale. So where they're mining a great deal more Tanzanite, they also come across Tsavorite. However, the Tsavorite in that area tends to be lighter, and therefore a lot more lighter material was coming out. And to answer your question, yeah, they were like, oh, we have all this light material. What are we going to do with it?
Right.
We have to do something with it. And the industry has always dictated that Tsavorite is a richer color,
Sure.
uh, green grossular garnet. And then this lighter material came out, people didn't accept it as Tsavorite, that actually were seeing it at the time, even though miners and people who were in the Tsavorite industry knew that this green material, this lighter, darker, and everything in between, always comes out when you mine. We just couldn't sell it. But now there was enough material out there that we had to think and say, well, we need to do something with this. We need to monetize it somehow.
Right.
So then mint grossular garnet was sort of coined in the industry, and then because a lot of it comes from Marilani, uh, you had Marilani mint garnet because that sounds pretty, right? And and then a lot of it was being sold as that material, and people were that didn't know any better, like, oh well, this is brand new material out of Marilani and Tanzania, etc. It's like, no, guys, this is this is this is light green grossular garnet, and I have huge pieces I could show you from the early 1970s. So I have one in my father's collection that's over 25 carats, and the stone was mined in the early 70s. And it's something that we just didn't have a market for. And then to go to back to your question, well, is it Tsavorite? I mean, is it Tsavorite? Well, it's a good question. There isn't a test right now that dictates a scientific test that dictates if a green grossular garnet has a certain level of chromium and vanadium, does that make it Tsavorite? Um, or not? And I mean, in emerald, they certainly test for chromium and vanadium. If it's colored by vanadium, they call it green beryl, right? But and if it's colored by chromium, it's emerald, and it has to have a rich enough saturation. But as far as Tsavorite's concerned, there's no lab that I'm aware of that tests the chromium and vanadium content. And if you send a light colored green green grossular garnet into the majority of labs and you get a lab report back, it'll say Tsavorite.
Oh, wow.
Now, from a sales standpoint, I like to sell it as mint grossular garnet or mint garnet
Mhm.
as opposed to Tsavorite, because otherwise it's hard for the consumer to understand the price differential, because a more richly saturated, let's say medium color, will command a 400% premium on a mint of basically the same size.
Well, and in my opinion, from the sales standpoint, part of what makes Savorite extremely appealing to the customer is that it's an emerald alternative, that it's rarer and tougher and harder than emerald. And so, if you're trying to sell mint garnet, it wouldn't look like emerald at all.
Exactly. That's very true as well. And I agree with you, and that's why the majority of what I sell still would be Tsavorite by value. But if you're looking at volume, a lot of people, a lot of designers are looking for a light, bright stone with a pleasing color. So volume wise, mint garnet sells a great deal. And
Sure.
there's certainly a viable market there for mint garnet, mint grossular garnet now. It doesn't command and never will command the price of a premium quality Tsavorite, but there's a viable market where 40 years ago there definitely wasn't.
Right. No, yeah, I can definitely see that. And there is something to be said. I think Savorite commands a very high reputation in this industry, and it's not that mint garnet necessarily diminishes that, it doesn't, but I do think that most industry professionals, they have enough of a connection to Savorite that they're gonna wanna maintain true to what Savorite is and what Savorite should be. So I'd be really surprised if the definition expanded to include mint garnet as a Savorite. I think if somebody did that, it would probably be a sales tactic maybe. But
No,
mint garnet I see very playfully in very unique designs, kind of in the same designs that you would see tourmaline in. Whereas Savorite, and this is a point I wanted to discuss with you and get your opinion on, Savorite is even seen in bridal jewelry now. I've actually come across multiple people on the internet who have a Savorite engagement ring, which is incredible. And your beautiful wife Danielle, she has a Savorite engagement ring.
yeah, yeah, certainly so. And I mean that is funny with my wife because when, when I was going to get engaged, my father brought me a tray of gemstones, and he said, "Well, you can pick any one you want for your engagement ring." And of course, my only options were sovereigns, right?
And hers
So,
is huge. How big is her Savorite?
hers is about 6.5 carats, so it's quite a nice stone, but
It's
it's
gorgeous.
thank you. Aside from that, it's just the color is just extraordinarily rare. Even for Tsavorite, one will not find that color. I mean, you could search for 10 years and not find that color. So it is very, very nice, and thank you very much. But Tsavorite makes a fantastic engagement ring. I mean, if somebody's looking for a green gemstone, here you have your brightest, most durable, rarest, when compared to emerald, green gemstone that you could buy. And in my opinion, if one loves green and one wants green in an engagement ring, it's by far the best green gemstone to serve that purpose. Of
Oh,
course, I'm
absolutely. I think
not
it's the
biased.
prettiest. I think it's prettier than green sapphire, in my opinion. I've never seen a green sapphire that looks as beautiful as Savorite. What would your advice be to sellers, retail sellers who are marketing Savorite for bridal jewelry as far as advising their clients on care to avoid damage?
Care to avoid damage, I mean, please keep in mind that no colored gemstone is going to be anywhere close to the durability of a diamond. And even your corundum, even your ruby and sapphire, corundum, so your rubies and sapphires will be a good deal more durable than the rest. But after spinel, I'd put Tsavorite right up there as far as durability with any other colored gemstone that I can readily think of off the top of my head. So, with that being the case, Tsavorite is not oiled, it's not treated in any way. There's no irradiation, so it's not going to lose color in sunlight. It's not going to, if you put it in the ultrasonic vibrasonic cleaner, it's not going to have the oil dissipated out of the gem. It's not going to lose oil after years and years of washing it in a sink. It's just a very durable color gemstone. Please keep in mind, again, everything is relative. And so to give you an idea, Tsavorite's 7.5 on Mohs scale of hardness. So its scratchability is is very good as far as
Mhm.
color gems are concerned. It's also cubic with no cleavage. So it's not an overly brittle stone, and there isn't a cleavage plane that you could accidentally knock that will simply shear the stone in two. Uh, that being said, I would suggest that, and every lady in my family has worn Tsavorite for decades as engagement rings,
Mhm.
and all of them, knock on wood, are in good order. And I've sold thousands of stones over the years, many of which were put in engagement rings and haven't had any issues as long as care was taken. And when I say care, uh, as far as cleaning is concerned, you can clean Tsavorite with any normal jewelry cleaner. Uh, Obviously, I mean, even acidic jewelry cleaners, dish soaps, bar soaps, any form of cleaning. I know if you were to look at the GMA guidelines of at least going through the FGA, they said don't put garnets in vibrasonic or ultrasonic cleaners, but I can't think of any reason why not to. We've never had an issue. I have one sitting in my office and I do it all the time. And I've never had an issue. So personally, I don't think that's a problem. I would suggest though that if one is going to the gym, don't wear your ring at a gym. You don't
Don't
want to.
wear any jewelry at the gym. Anybody who's listening to this, let it be known, do not
I
wear your jewelry at the gym.
No, certainly not. I mean, obviously, if you have earrings, studs, or something that's going to be out of the way in an earring, that should be perfectly fine, unless you're at a boxing gym or something. But also, don't wear it when gardening. I have heard of one or two gardening accidents before, and please don't do that. And
Tragic. That's
yeah,
tragic.
and also I would say, and this would go for any jewelry, don't wear it when washing dishes.
Mm,
You'd be surprised how washing dishes can damage or simply dirty jewelry
yeah.
uh, over the years. So I mean, just basic common sense. You don't want to knock it on gloss countertops or granite countertops or car doors or anything like that. But I mean, for daily wear and tear, as long as some sensibilities are taken into account, I don't foresee any real issues there.
I love that as beautiful and as rare as it is, it's still a durable stone. It's still a stone that can be worn every day. And I'm very passionate about garnets in general. I have a 10 karat rhodolite that I wear every day.
Oh, very
I would
nice.
like to have one of each of the garnets, and I want to see Tsavorite gain the recognition that it deserves. I would really love to see salespeople at the retail level feeling very confident talking about it, especially, anyone listening to this podcast. I hope that anyone who has questions will reach out and really get the confidence that they need to sell it. But I'd love to see at the consumer level, I'd love to see recognition for how incredible this stone is. Bruce, what's your advice to salespeople who are wanting to sell Tsavorite to customers who may have never heard of it before?
Well, I think that nowadays, especially in such a consumable society where everything is so readily available. I mean, almost anything you want, you can jump online right now and get it in a day or two, right?
Right.
So everything in society has just become so consumable. There's such easy access. I don't know. I mean, I would suggest to a salesperson to try and sell the exotic. Here you have, if we're looking at intrinsic properties, literally the king of green gemstones. It is, if we take its closest competitor, which would be emerald, it's far brighter than emerald. It's
Mhm.
far more durable than emerald. It's exponentially rarer than emerald. It's 100% natural, which is a big thing these days. Everybody wants. There's a huge push towards uh, natural things in everybody's life, whether you're talking bar soaps or you're talking food. Everybody's going back to nature basically because we've gotten so used to just a processed world. And again, it's 100% natural. Not that many gemstones can say that there's no treatment whatsoever for this gem. On top of that, if somebody likes green, it's a it's the purest green. It has the least amount of yellow and the least amount of blue when compared to other green gemstones out of anything out there. So if somebody truly loves green, it's the purest green. And it's only found in 2 countries in commercial quantities in the world. It's unique to East Africa, that being Kenya and Tanzania in commercial quantities, as opposed to a gem like emerald that's found in over 30 countries throughout the world. So if you're looking at brilliance, if you're looking at durability, if you're looking at rarity, and if you're looking at a natural gemstone, as far as green gems are concerned, there's nothing even close. On top of that, currently it's a fifth to the tenth the cost of an equivalent quality emerald. Not that the emerald would ever be as bright, rare, or durable.
Wow.
With that being the case, if you're a salesperson, I think you have just a myriad of fantastic reasons why you could talk to a client about Tsavorite being a vastly better choice than any other green gemstone that you could possibly be selling.
Wonderful. How can retailers reach you, Bruce? How can they buy from you? And where can people learn more about this exotic African gemstone?
Sure. So simply please shoot me an email. I'm brucebridges@tsavorite.com. You can certainly call me as well. And on top of that, as far as information is concerned, we have our website that we're completely revamping that'll be up in the next month, which is tsavorite.com. So on there, you'll find the history of Tsavorite. You'll find some just unbelievable photos of some of the finest Tsavorites on Earth. And I think you'll just find it a very interesting adventure and journey into the world of Tsavorite. And again, that website, which is just tsavorite.com, the new version will be up in about a month. And also,
Excellent.
if you come to any of the gem shows, we're of course exhibiting booth 1022 at the upcoming Tucson Gem Fair, which starts February 1st. We'll be in Las Vegas as well, and Denver after that. So there's quite a few ways to get in touch.
Well, to everyone listening, I hope you make a point to come see Bruce and his wife Danielle at their booth at the shows. Definitely reach out to him. I reached out to him and he was super approachable. I just sent him an email and was like, "Hey, I want to do a podcast." So I can attest to the fact that he is very polite and welcoming and will answer any questions that you have. So if anybody has questions about how to get in contact with Bruce, you can definitely reach out to me, or as he said, reach out to him directly. But let's get some Tsavorite in your store. Let's educate customers on why Tsavorite is a phenomenal choice for a green gemstone. And let's make sure that your staff feels confident and comfortable talking about this exotic and rare gem. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today. And we are excited to see you in Tucson.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It will be lovely to see you again in Tucson. I wish everybody a very happy new year coming up, with all the best for 2022.
Well, let me record. Can you still see me?
Yeah, I see you fine.
Okay. Then if you just want to pick up at hue and talk about hue in Tsavorite, I'll just let you roll.
Sure. So it's a good question on what color is most sought after in Tsavorite. And as we've discussed with tone, you do have, at least on our grading scale, 3 premium tones, being a medium, medium plus, and medium dark in color tone. But also, one has to remember, in any colored gemstone, hue is also equally important. And obviously, Tsavorite is a green gemstone, and the goal of a green gemstone is to be a true green, a pure green. And if you look at any other colored gemstone, what is the most valued ruby? Well, it's your reddest ruby. What's your most valued blue sapphire? It's your bluest, truest, purest blue sapphire. And in turn, the same is true for Tsavorite. Your purest, truest green is your most sought after color. Now, that being said, you can get secondary modifying hues to that primary green, and that can either be yellow or it can be blue. And yellow is seen as a demerit. So if you have a green Tsavorite as the primary color, obviously being green, and then you have a strong secondary yellow modifying hue to that green, that Tsavorite would be sold at somewhat of a discount. Now, your purest green is, of course, extremely sought after, but also in Tsavorite, a blue-green um, blue secondary modifying hue to the primary green is also very sought after. And at that point, it's almost in the eye of the beholder whether someone prefers that pure green or a slight blue-green modifying hue to that primary green. So to answer that question that you asked, as far as hue is concerned, yellow would be considered a demerit and therefore a discount as a secondary modifying hue. A pure green is extremely sought after, as well as a blue secondary modifying hue to that green primary.